How are we doing, everyone, and welcome into one of our two Friday episodes here for Week 7 fantasy football action. My name's Gavin. Today I'm going to be talking some wide receivers I'm looking to sell here as we move into this week's games, or even as we transition into Week 8 action here. As the rest of this season, there are plenty of names I like better than these options, and I think that while you can move off of them and have the chance to, these are moves you should be making. So, if you're new around here to the channel, make sure to drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you never miss an episode, as well as go check out some of our other videos we posted for Week 7 action. And without further ado, let's hit the intro and get straight in to today's video. Alright, here we go. So the first player I'm looking to sell here in Week 7 is Julio Jones of the Tennessee Titans. There are many reasons for myself and others looking to move off of Julio right now. His stock is pretty dang low, but the one thing that hopefully in your leagues you can still cling to is that name value of Julio, of course, being once upon a time one of the game's top receivers. But right now, there's some significant trust issues between Julio Jones and his fantasy managers out there. And again, for some people, this is going to play into trade cost and what you're actually able to get in return for Jones. But I think some and a lot of fantasy managers out there would still consider him to be a wide receiver 2 caliber player, or someone who has the potential to put up high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. Now, for myself personally, that's not exactly something that I project for him long-term this year, and I've got my question marks about his situation, his health, and some other things. We'll get into that in just a second. But if you can use Julio Jones to go trade for some of the more dependable fantasy wide receiver 2s right now, and some of those other players who, if you're looking to go check out some of those names, my rest of season wide receiver rankings, if you can get anyone between the 13 and 24 spot in that episode, I would be doing that right away for Julio, because I think, again, his price has dipped so low and his actual productivity has just not been there this season. He had one standout game where he was phenomenal. He actually kind of got robbed of a touchdown that was called back after review. I guess it wasn't robbed, because the review showed that he just barely did not get both feet down in bounds. But Julio outside of that game has been very, very underwhelming. His target ceiling so far this season, his season high in terms of passes thrown his direction, is 8. Which is not where you want a quality and productive wide receiver to be at. There are plenty of names, including like Jacoby Myers per se, who are literally seeing more targets on a per-game basis than Julio Jones is with the Tennessee Titans right now. And the biggest reason for concern for Julio, in my opinion, is his health. It seems like the trend of the last 2-3 seasons now has been Julio Jones' hamstring acting up, pulling him out of games early, keeping him out of contests the next week. It has been an annoyance and a nuisance to no end for fantasy managers trying to keep up with and deal with Julio Jones' availability, whether he's in, whether he's out. Is he actually going to be productive and be able to produce through this injury? It's been a nightmare. So if you can avoid Julio Jones staying on your roster for the rest of this fantasy season and go find an option out there to get a more dependable and reliable face on your fantasy teams, that's something I'm absolutely going out and doing right now. Chris Godwin. Now, it's not that I'm panicking on Chris Godwin or looking to sell him at all costs here per se, but what I am looking to do here is increase the upside at the position that I've got Chris Godwin playing for me in my lineups, and that's either for teams that are super RB heavy. Maybe you've got an elite quarterback or tight end and you went a little bit lighter on receiver depth in the draft. Maybe he's your wide receiver 1, and that's probably not ideal, but for most cases, he's probably a team's wide receiver 2. Maybe if you've got a loaded wide receiver core, he could be your wide receiver 3 in your lineups. But this is still a top 24 play. I've got him on the lower side of things. Those rest of season wide receiver rankings, again, just came out yesterday, so those are still pretty fresh. And injuries haven't really played too much of a factor in changing the order of those rankings for me just yet. I'll be updating that list every other week, so week 9, that next episode will be coming. Chris Godwin is a player, though, like I said, on the lower end of the side of being a wide receiver 2 on that list. I believe I had him as my wide receiver 21 for the rest of the season. He was the lowest of the 3 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, him and Antonio Brown have very, very small margins of difference, and I think Chris Godwin has the higher floor of the 2 players, whereas Antonio Brown has the higher ceiling. Here's the things I'm not too big of a fan of with Chris Godwin. He only has 2 games out of his 6 played so far this season with 10 or more targets. That's not elitely consistent volume, and again, he's not an elitely consistent fantasy player or producer at this point, but he is a player who you could use to get a player of better significance or better upside with as a trade asset, because having TB12 as his quarterback is enticing in trade offers, because some players potentially look at the quarterback position in trade deals to see who is my quarterback or who is my wide receiver going to be catching passes from. Someone who I actually really like this season the rest of the way is Deontay Johnson. And while Ben Roethlisberger might not be the most productive or reliable fantasy quarterback, I know Big Ben is going to be just overloading him with targets and throwing him the football on such a high volume on a per-game basis that's going to make up for potentially uncatchable passes and whatnot, because just catching balls at the line of scrimmage and getting run after catch is going to help him find production. DJ Moore is another player. Similarly, with Sam Darnold, not an elite level quarterback talent. He is going to still find ways to produce because Sam literally forces him the football and throws it to him over and over again. And sometimes you'll see DJ literally get targeted 3 plays in a row. So just to speak to how volume can impact a fantasy player's value, again, Chris Godwin also hasn't scored a touchdown since week 2. So you're looking at a month of time where we haven't seen Chris Godwin find the end zone. Now that's bound to come to a close here sooner rather than later. Maybe if you even hang on to him this week, he happens to find the end zone and score, that just increases your trade value for him down the stretch. But Chris right now is the intermediate side, or he's the intermediate pass-catching route runner for this Tampa Bay offense. Mike Evans is being used a lot in the red zone. Obviously, a huge body, big frame. He's going to be targeted down there, especially when Gronk's out of the lineup. And AB is this team's deep threat right now. He's the guy stretching the field and pushing the defense vertically. That leaves Chris Godwin underneath and at that 10 to 15-yard range, where he's not exactly making huge explosive plays, and his run after catch hasn't quite been as elite as it was in that 2019 season with Jameis Winston. So just a couple of things that I think are keeping Chris Godwin from reaching his full potential. Now, obviously, as a player, he might be a better talent than someone you're going out and trading for, but his actual productivity and potential in your fantasy lineups is a little bit flawed, I think, going forward the rest of the year. And we've started to kind of see those trends not only this season, but last year as well. Tyler Lockett, another name I'm looking to move off of right now. Lockett's super talented. He is an elite field stretcher, an elite deep ball pass-catching weapon for that Seattle Seahawks offense. But with the uncertainties without Russell Wilson, without seeing really any avenue for him to be as productive as a player without Russ on the field as he was with him. Now, that seems like a very obvious statement when you lose a top 5-6 quarterback like a Russell Wilson. Obviously, your wide receivers' numbers are going to drop. But the way that Tyler Lockett produces, being that downfield pass-catching ability, that takes a significantly higher hit than a player, say, a DK Metcalf, who is, 6'4", and can run slant routes all day, and Geno Smith can laser focus on him and throw him the football over and over again. So Tyler Lockett's a player whose skill set does not match his quarterback very well at all right now, and his consistency has been very, very unreliable this year. He has boomed in 2 out of his 5 games this season, but when Tyler Lockett does not boom, you're looking at a player who is not producing floor numbers, because if he doesn't connect on one of those deep passing patterns, he's not going to end up getting you the fancy production you're looking for. So with Geno Smith in action here again, something that I'm looking to stay away from, move off of. Russ is supposedly ahead of the recovery timetable and schedule right now, but it's still an injury that, with your throwing hand being involved, there's going to be a significant timeline, I think, before he's actually ready to go out there and play full-fledged Russell Wilson football at 100%. Not necessarily mistake-free football, but at least up to the caliber of a player that he was once before prior to this injury. So Tyler Lockett, I'm selling on him right now because I don't think his skill set matches his quarterback, and I don't want to deal with the bumpy road and his stock continuing to fall the rest of the way this season while Geno Smith is under center for the Seahawks team. Amari Cooper for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, again, a lot of these players are super, super talented. They've got a lot of ability and capability to produce, but just like Tyler Lockett's inconsistencies, Amari Cooper has only hit on 3 out of his 6 games this year. So it's a 50% margin where we're talking about him actually living up to his fantasy expectations. And he's only got 1 game this season over 8 targets, that being the Week 1 performance against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So you've got a significant amount of things working against you. And I think that when you've got another target like CeeDee Lamb in this offense and you're trying to keep it balanced by running the football at about a 50-50 split with Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard taking up a lot of this offensive volume, you're looking at a boom or bust play with Amari. So if you can find, again, one of these more consistently productive players, I keep going back and back and back to Deontay Johnson, but that's a player who is a prime example of someone who is being targeted at a very high clip and also has the ability and capability to produce those ceiling numbers. And just being the fact that he's not a household name yet allows you to trade for him for a lower price than, even Amari Cooper has more name value, I would say, than a Deontay Johnson does. So your casual fantasy player would be more inclined in some situations, in some circumstances. This is just an example for some leagues out there, because obviously if you've got a group of 10, 11 guys that are diehard football fans, they'll know their stuff and what they're talking about here. But there is the potential, the scenario in some leagues where you can go off and pull a pretty good deal for a player with a lot better consistency and ceiling value packaged into one for a player like Cooper, who is basically all or nothing every week, because the games where he doesn't hit, it gets quite ugly for him in that offense. And then finally here, Robert Woods. This is one where if you look at the raw point totals the last 3 weeks, you would say he's trending up and he's finally getting back to what we expected him to be this season. But if you look at how he's getting those numbers, that's the concerning part for me. He's got one truly strong game this year, and that was against Seattle when he was peppered in targets, was separating and winning his routes basically every snap. And then the other 2 games were basically inflated by touchdowns. The yardage was not good. The target share wasn't there. The involvement in the offense was not what we expect from Robert Woods at this point in his time with the LA Rams. Robert Woods' decline this year has been rather puzzling, and the ascension of Cooper Kupp is not shocking, but the extent to which it has gone, in which he has masked Robert Woods' involvement here, it is what is rather surprising. So Robert Woods has been a player the last 2 years who has been typically known for a very safe fantasy floor and being used as a dynamic weapon who not only catches passes near the line of scrimmage, is heavily involved in the screen game, and gets a lot of run after a catch, but he's also been known to take a lot of jet sweeps, end arounds, and reverses in the Sean McVay offense, and used in a very creative manner, and that has not at all been the case for him this year. His rushing yard numbers are very, very down from the last 2 years. He's ran for over 100 yards each of the past 2 seasons, and even found the end zone a couple times. This year, he's got just 18 yards rushing, so he's being used a lot less in that dynamic fashion. And when you look at his target numbers as well, he's on pace to be lower than he has been the previous 2 seasons with the Rams as well. So despite being in an extended season here and having more time to pick up those numbers. So I'm beginning to back off a little bit of Robert Woods right now. He can clearly still produce in this offense because he is a very talented player, very capable of separating and winning his routes. He can find the end zone. This team is good enough to score touchdowns at a high rate, and you just hope one of those bounces Robert Woods' way. But with my rest of the season rankings, breaking down the wide receiver room and situation right now, I've got him right on the cusp of being outside the wide receiver 2 territory. He's my wide receiver 24 right now, so if you can use his last 3 games of productivity as a means to bump up and increase his trade value, that's something I'm looking to target and do here every single time. Alrighty, those are my 5 wide receivers I'm looking to move off of here in Week 7 fantasy football. If you've got any questions regarding trades in your individual leagues, last-minute lineup changes and fixes you'd like me to have a peek at here, or anything else fantasy football related, make sure to drop that down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to as many of you as possible. Also, go check out our social medias that are in the description of today's episode, and go join the SFS Community Discord for another way to interact and engage with other viewers of the channel. And every once in a while, I will get back to as many of you as possible as I can in the time that I've got in that server as well. So if you've got questions, that's another way you can try and get a hold of me, or potentially get some responses from other people in the SFS community as well. They do a great job of interacting and talking to each other, and they're answering each other's questions, helping each other out, and just talking football. It's a great time. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you guys in the next episode. If you choose to watch that, I've got another episode, my top 5 must-sell running backs, out today. So go check that out, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.